on, Foxy. It's your birthday. Not for real, just for play. This is Cree Summer, and Moana Nui will be right back.
Welcome to the Moana Nui podcast, everyone. And again, thank you so much, Dana and Moana, for inviting me for our monthly leadership discussion. Today, I am so excited to have this amazing guest with us because, frankly, this particular segment on financial advisors, wealth building, it took a little bit, because of the compliance issues associated with being a licensed financial advisor. So I just want you to know that out of the multiple people I asked, Linda Vu actually said yes, and she's willing to go through the compliance process. So my guest today is Linda Vu, AIF CFP. She's the financial advisor for BDL Advisors, and she's actually located in Dunwoody, Georgia. And I'll have her share her information with you a little bit later. But before we get started, we do have some compliance things to take care of. So I'm going to start by literally reading this compliance statement first, and then we'll get into our conversation. So securities and investment advisory services offered through Osaic Wealth, Inc., member of FINRA, SIPC. Osaic Wealth, Inc. is separately owned, and other entities and or marketing names, products, or services referenced here are independent of Osaic Wealth, Inc. BDL Advisors are not affiliated with Osaic Wealth, Inc. or registered as a broker-dealer or investment advisor. Insurance service offered through BDL Advisors. So literally, you guys, I had to say that word for word from a compliance perspective. So Linda, welcome to our Moana Nui podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate this.
Absolutely. You want to share with the audiences how we met?
We met through a mutual friend, through Holly.
Yes, absolutely. The connector.
Yes.
Of many people. And I mean, it's so funny how the network actually works, right, in our community. So everyone, we're actually, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and Linda is over in Dunwoody. So just want to make sure that everybody knew that she is close by. And so let's just start off by talking about your background a little bit. Linda, can you share with us your heritage and your background?
Sure. My parents actually escaped the Vietnam War in 1975. And so they came over to America, and they worked hard for 2 years and saved up a lot of money, and started their own business 2 years after being in America, and started their own alteration store. One of the things that my dad said to my mother was, he said, "Hey, in America, we are not going to accept handouts," meaning that we're not going to be on Medicaid. We're not going to receive government benefits. We are going to work here because there are jobs and there's opportunity. And so after my father was a janitor, my mom was a seamstress. They worked for 2 years. They saved up money, and then they started their own alteration store. Unfortunately, 3.5 years later, after the alteration store was open, my father passed away. So I was about 5.5 years old, and my mom was a single mother. And I remember her coming up to me and just kneeling down to my level and grabbing me by the shoulder and saying to me over and over again, "Linda, promise me that you'll never, ever let anyone control you. Promise me." And I was a kid. I didn't know what she meant. And I would say, "Yes, Mom, I promise you." And I'd take off. And she did that years after years after years. And I really didn't understand that until I graduated from college. And I finally understood that the only way for anyone to not control me is for me to make my own money. I call my own shots when I make my own money. I'm with my husband because I love him, not because I need financial security from him, right? So, so that was my turning point when once I understood that. Luckily, when I graduated from Agnes Scott College, I ended up working for a company called Northern Trust. And Northern Trust had a retirement consulting where I learned about defined contribution plans and defined benefit plans. More specifically, I learned about 401k plans, 403b plans, pension plans, profit sharing plans. And that's when I was like, wow, there's a way to save so that I can be financially free my entire life, right? So, and interestingly enough, a week after I accepted my job at Northern Trust, I had another company of the pharmaceutical company, and they offered me a position that paid me $10,000 more on base salary. And then my bonus could be up to my base salary. So in a sense, I could have made double what I was making at Northern Trust. But for some reason, I didn't leave Northern Trust. I was curious. I wanted to learn, hey, how can I be financially free my entire life? You know, and so Northern Trust was a great learning experience. So I learned about the various plans, and then eventually I worked part of their trade desk, um, and and that's how I got involved in the securities industry. After Northern Trust, I worked for another broker dealer. It was a small broker dealer, and I learned many things. I wore many hats because they were small. So I was the commission department, I was a marketing department, I was the operation person, I was the trade person. And it was a great learning experience. But at that particular time, larger broker dealers were buying out the smaller ones. So I ended up looking for another job, and I ended up landing at FSC Securities, which is now known as Osaic Wealth, right? And most of my time spent with Osaic Wealth was basically supervising financial advisors, helping them with their business, but also ensuring that they were acting in their clients' best interests, that they were putting their clients first. And I did that for over a decade, and I loved what I did. But I'll tell you, and my advisors would say to me, they would say, Linda, whenever you help me, you help my clients indirectly, and I see how happy you are when you help me. They said, you know what? You should be a financial advisor because it's 10 times more rewarding being a financial advisor. And I'd hear it year after year after year. And then eventually I decided, you know what? I'm going to make that change. And so that's how I became a financial advisor.
Well, first of all, there are so many nuggets already. It sounds like your parents really taught you the value of not only, uh, the independence and the wealth building, but the value of hard work and to not depend on anyone, right,
Mhm.
for any government assistance. I thought that was pretty significant and pretty forward thinking for them. Even with their humble background in 2 years, the fact that they built up their net worth to be able to purchase a business. That's huge. The other thing that was interesting to me is the fact that you got educated and you opened your eyes on all of these different types of funds. And the fact that you got exposed to that early on, I think that's huge because I think people don't understand that even now, even I don't assume people understand those different funds, including the 401k and other opportunities for. And I always say, by the way, we need to make money while we're sleeping, right? So that's really my philosophy. I think that's important. The time value of money and all the things that are important. And finally, I don't know if the fact that you're in the financial advisory capacity, is that usual for AANHPI female? Like, is that a normal or a traditional way that gets encouraged? Or how do you perceive that profession in terms of as it relates to the cultural piece?
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of female financial advisors at this point in time, right? And the reason why I say that's because when I worked part of the broker dealer, we would have, conferences, and the representation for females was very low compared to male, right?
Yeah.
And then now you add the Asian part of it, and you really don't see that many Asian female financial advisors. Um, I love the fact that, times have changed and it's evolving, right? So now we are more knowledgeable when it comes to financial advisors and financial planning. But I think we'll continue to see more females enter the industry. And yeah, because really think about it. I mean, if you were to go to Vietnam, these ladies run the show. Like they have their own businesses. They are, they're managing the household. It's just having that incorporated here in the US as well. It's
I
just
love that.
educating and not and just sharing with them. I wish personally for me that I knew more about it so that I could have shared with my mom so that she could have been financially free. Now, lucky for her, she had me. So, I was like, Mom, you don't need to work anymore. Go ahead and retire. Come live with me. You don't need to worry about your bills. You don't need to worry about anything. You don't need to worry about food, where to live. I'm taking care of all that, right? But
Amazing.
I was lucky that I learned how to save and invest early on right out of college. So I had this long time horizon to accumulate my wealth.
I love it.
So,
I love it.
yes.
So let me ask you, what type of clients are you attracting? Like, do you have a target audience that you support and help?
I like to work with people who are serious about their own financial plan. I don't want to work with someone who's going to treat their investment account as a checking account. It's not like that. So it's just, if you're serious about your financial goals, if you're serious about achieving financial freedom, then that's the person I like to work with. I don't have, ideally, I'd rather not have a set dollar amount. You have to have X dollar amount for me to be your financial advisor. Because I'll be honest with you, I mean, I have friends that come to me and they'll say, look, my son just graduated from college. Would you sit down with him and just teach him how to be financially free? And I'll say, yeah, I can do that. And I will sit down with them and I'll say, hey, here are some things that you should do. And and I'm going to teach you how to be a multimillionaire if you start now. And it's very simple, right? But it's just a lot of people don't know because it's not something that's taught. When I went to college or when I went to high school, no one taught me, oh, here, let me share with you 401k plans or different retirement plans. It's just a matter of just educating everyone.
Absolutely. So let me step back and say, okay, so let's say that you do have that either college student, or maybe I am entering into my first job and I don't know where to start. I don't have a ton of cash. I'm
Mhm,
starting.
mhm.
So where do I begin? When you say financial planning, like where do I even start?
Right. I would say, first you need to start with understanding your financial situation, understanding your cash flow, understanding what you owe, right? So if you came to me and you said, and I would, of course I would gather information from you just to understand where you currently stand. But if you came to me and said, Linda, I have all this credit card debt, I have student loan debt, I have all this, and I don't know where to start, and I'd love to save, I'd say, well, tell me more about your debt, right? What credit cards? What's the APR? You need to understand. I don't want you to take your situation because it's overwhelming and kind of sweep it underneath the rug. No, it's about addressing it and trying to figure out, let's create a game plan to get you out of financial debt, right? And then once you're out of financial debt, the other thing I would say is you need to create I call it an FU fund, but you can call it an opportunity fund or emergency fund, but you
Uh,
need to have something in place, right? So it's just everyone's situation's completely different, but it's starting with understanding your financial situation and addressing it head on.
I love the fact that you call it the FU fund. I mean, hey, I think people understand that. The saddest thing for me is when a lot of times I think people stay in a job that they don't like because they're attached to the money, the salary. And I get it. And that may be necessary, with your life circumstances, but having that FU fund sure helps.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. So, what are some of the things that if let's say that I'm in the middle of my career,
Mhm.
you talk about understanding your debt situation, you talk about having a game plan, but let's say that I'm in the middle of my career and, I've got kids, I've got all these obligations. I don't have a ton of cash, but I want to start with something.
Right. Right.
So what would be your advice if I was in a circumstance where I don't have a lot of extra cash, but I want to start something?
Right. Right. And I'm assuming that when you say you want to start with something, is that you want to save towards retirement, right? Correct me if I'm
Absolutely.
wrong.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes. Saving for, so one of the things that, when I think about financial stability, it's about having a liquid cash.
Mhm.
And then after your liquid cash of X amount of months, if possible, right? Not everybody can do this, but again, do that first and then, go into your long-term, maybe financial assistance. But where do I begin? Do I start with that liquid cash or do I want to maybe start looking at something more?
If you came to me and you said, Linda, my debt's paid off, I have an emergency fund or an FU fund set aside, right? Then I would say, you know what? Are you saving and, are you working? If you are, if you're W-2, if you're working for a company, I'd say, do they have a 401k plan? If they do, great. What's their employer matching, right? And you may say, oh, it's 100% up to 4%. I'll say, you need to start with that because that's 100% gain right there if you put in that 4%.
That's
right? And then if you said, Linda, I have more money to invest above that 4%, then I'll say, do you have an HSA plan, a health savings account? And you'll say, yes. And I'm like, well, you should do that too. And the reason why is because, when you put that money in the HSA, one, you get a tax deduction. The money in there is tax deferred when it's invested. And then when you take it out for health reason, it's tax free, right? So then I would say max out your HSA. And then if you have more money above that, I would say, let's go back to your 401k plan and let's add more money into that. Let's see if you can max that out.
So the 401k is based on the company's match, which is different for everyone, right?
Right.
So that depends on who you work for. A lot of corporations have that. I'm not sure about nonprofits as much or government, but wherever they are offered, it's definitely take. So you would recommend that they max that out first?
Yes. Yes. Well, I would recommend that they start with contributing up to what the employer will match you, right? So if they're going to match you 100% up to 4%, go ahead and contribute that 4%. Yeah. And then once you get to that point, you have more money to invest. Now go ahead and contribute and max out your HSA, right? Because there's a limit to that, right? Yeah. And then once you've done that,
by the way,
I'd have to check my cheat sheet.
Okay.
So my cheat sheet, because it changes.
Absolutely. Right? I think for 2024, what would it be to max out your HSA? Because again, I don't even know if people realize that exists. I don't assume that people know. But what would that look like?
Let me look that up real quick. I always refer to my cheat sheet. And the reason why is because it changes. It changes every year. Right. Yeah. Or may not change, but let's see here.
Just to double check. And again, everyone, this is good to think about. It doesn't mean that this is what you have to do or what you should do. But if there's any matching where the company's matching up to a certain amount, I mean, that's free money. Why would you not? Right? That's the logic. And to work towards that, to grow up to that.
So for the health savings account contribution limit for 2024, okay, the limit is $4,150 for individuals and $8,300 for families. Okay, if you're age 55 and older, you can contribute an additional $1,000 as a catch-up contribution. So that's the health savings account.
So basically $9,300 for a whole family.
$8,300
plus another $1,000 because I'm in that 55.
Oh, okay. Yes. yes. Depending on your age, right?
Yeah. So that's good to know. So Linda, let's say that somebody is trying to, there are people who play with the stocks and what's the benefit of somebody individually doing stocks versus having an advisor doing funds? What's the difference?
I describe to clients, for example, if I handed you a deck of cards and you took one card out of that deck, you own a stock, okay? But if you took off 52 of those cards, you're owning a mutual fund or exchange traded fund. It's more diversified. So I believe in just keeping it simple, and I believe in diversification, right? Because if you own one company, imagine the risk, right? The amount of risk that you take, the volatility. And for me, based upon risk and reward, I just like to be more diversified, especially when you see a volatile market, right? So that's what I believe in, diversification. I explain to my clients when we invest your money, it's like watching grass grow. It's boring. It's boring. But we keep in mind your risk tolerance, your time horizon, and your financial goals. And the nice thing about working with a financial advisor is that, that financial advisor will take the emotions out, right? And then remind clients, like I have clients that will come to me and say, oh, it's election year. I'm so worried. I want to just take all my money out and just let it sit in the side. I'd say, no, I don't think that's a good choice. And let me answer your question with data. Let me show you what it's meant, during election year, how the market has performed. Let me show you how the markets perform when there's a Republican president versus a Democratic president, right? So I like to answer questions based on data, right? I'll give you another example. One of my clients, I met her during COVID, and she was just so scared about the pandemic. So she had all of her money sitting in cash. She was a good chunk of money, right? And I just said, you know what, we've had other pandemics in the past. Let me show you. Let me show you these other pandemics. Let me show you how the market performed a year later, 3 years later, 5 years later. So I encouraged her to just to be invested, right? But
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, one of the things that I think is important is the tendency when the market's not doing well to want to pull out. And that's the worst thing you could do, right? Buy low, sell high, right? That's the concept. But I think that when you're in it, what I notice is that, there could be cyclical times where you're investing and things are not the markets generally fall like during year end, it seems like. But you hang in there, right? And because you're in it for the long haul and you wait for that to go through the different cycles. But I think that's my biggest lesson is when the pandemic was happening. And I remember when the market wasn't doing well and I was like, oh, I'm so nervous. But at the end of the day, you have to ride it out because you're in it for the long haul. And I think that mentality is helpful.
Right.
So it's kind of like you invest and you don't act like it exists almost is the way I look at it.
I would also say dollar cost average, right? The nice thing about the 401k plan, for example, is, from every paycheck, you're taking a certain percentage out and your dollar cost averaging.
Auto deduct is your friend.
Yes, yes. Keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
Automate the process so that you don't have to stress out about it, right? And I like to keep things very simple and to the point, and transparent too, right?
Absolutely. So let's say that we're, one of the things that people talk about is in credit, having good credit. Does that play into investing at all, or does that matter?
When I invest my clients' money, I don't check their credit score, right? It's just encouraging them to have a process to save, to stay invested, to ensure that the investments are based upon their risk tolerance, their time horizon, their financial goals. So I don't look at their credit score, but, I do encourage them to, pay off their debt. I do encourage them to, to have a good credit score because you might need a loan for a business that you're starting up, right? Or you might need a loan to purchase a house. So, but on my end, on the investment side, I do not ask for credit scores. But I do encourage, achieving a good credit score.
Yeah. And I think, Linda, where this could play out is, let's say that they're, financed at a very high interest rate that could affect their investments, right? Because they're paying exorbitant amount in interest in whether it's credit card or other things or home. You get the best rates when you have the better credit score, right? So I think that's a whole another segment, everyone, to talk about credit and how that affects your financial planning. But it definitely does. I just wanted to see how that affected how you invest. But it sounds like, that really doesn't come into play when you're talking about actually investing your money. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you is what's one of the most common questions that you get from your clients when you're first starting to, advise them? Like, what are some of the key questions?
When I first meet a prospect, it's really about me getting to know them, right? They do most of the talking very first meeting. I like to understand their concerns, their expectations, what they're doing, how they're doing it, how they're investing their money. I like to understand their situation, right? How they feel about money, everything. What situation they're in, because it helps me in creating that financial plan for them, right? So I do put that into consideration. So if a client came to me and said, Linda, I'm very tax conscious, right? I worry about taxes, or I don't have, most of my time is spent is listening. And then what I do is I take that data and I put it into a financial plan. And then I'll come back to them and say, hey, if you continue doing what you're doing, this is what it's going to look like when you retire, right? But let me give you some ideas. Let me show you, if you tweaked it here, or if you made some changes here, let me show you what that would mean for you, for your financial plan. And when I do the financial plan, we do look at the taxes. We do look at the Social Security. We do look at the various goals that they may have, right? And the financial plan is very different for every person, right? Because it's not a template, it's very customized to each person, right?
Yeah.
And usually when I create a financial plan too, whatever lifestyle that you're living today, I want you to maintain that lifestyle or have a better lifestyle during retirement. The only difference is that your money is working for you, right? So, and everyone defines retirement differently. For example, you may define, if you love what you're doing, your retirement may be continue working, right? But you have that choice to not work if you choose not to. It's about you having that financial freedom to make whatever choices that you make, and you know that financially your money's working for you, and it's gonna last.
Yeah, I
So,
love what you said about the fact that you have choices, and that's what it really comes down to.
right.
The one thing that we can't gain is time, right? So the
Mhm.
earlier that people can start, the better, because you have longer period of time. I did wonder, we talked a little bit about this, Linda, about the cultural overlay of how, when we talk about financial planning, the majority culture will talk about like almost like pooling, like creating a pool of wealth where they have inheritance for their children. It's usually mom, dad, many times the kids. That's kind of the traditional family model. But in
Mhm.
the Asian culture, many times it's, mom, dad, kids, auntie, uncles, grandma, cousins. And the family structure may be defined a little bit differently. And so the analogy I got was it's like a river, right?
Mhm.
They're not only they're saving along the way, they're helping each other along the way. How does that play into financial planning from your perspective? How do you see it?
Oh, I see it as, okay, now I understand your goals, right? So your goal is to be able to continue to help your family members and to be available for them, right? So I just incorporate that into that financial plan. So it gives me an idea as far as what's their time horizon. So every account may be different, right? So your 401k account may have a longer time horizon, but your non-qualified joint account with your spouse or your individual account may have a shorter time horizon. So I invest accordingly based upon the specific goals, the time horizon, and the risk tolerance for that each specific account. So it's good to know, and that's why it's very important for me to know, hey, what are you planning to do with this money? Right.
Yeah,
And then once I understand that, I can invest accordingly. Right.
yeah.
So, a younger person may say, Linda, I want to buy a house, within 5 years. And I'll say, okay, for this account, the goal is to have money down to purchase a house. Right. So that's how I incorporate that in the financial plan.
I love that. Now, have you ever had a situations where you had spouses who didn't agree on a vision? And then how do you help get them on the same page?
It's interesting because whenever I do a financial plan, I want to hear from both spouses, right? Because I need to understand. And sometimes, they may not be on the same page, but it's just once it's out there in the open, at least now they're addressing it and they're discussing it. And so that's very helpful. I met with someone recently and he said, when we retire, we're moving back to Vietnam. And she's like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? I don't want to go back to Vietnam. And so I love that because we were just like, okay, so now you need to really sit down and discuss this to make sure you're on the same page. Because apparently she doesn't want you to think for her, right? She has her own. And so, and when I do a financial plan too, because, there's actuarially right now, men are living up to age 92 and actuarially women are living up to age 94. So, but I try to compromise to make sure that everyone's happy, but it's good to lay it out on the table so that they understand how they feel about their financial goals.
Yeah, I think about that. I'm relatively newly married. And so,
Mhm.
I mean, we had to get on the same page, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I have been so independent for so long. And so to come together with another person, and I feel like for some reason, finances feel super personal.
Mhm.
Like it's almost like, oh my gosh, I'm going to actually reveal all this. And it can be scary, actually. For me, I was a little nervous. Uh,
Right.
and so it's been an interesting conversation. I think it can bring you closer
Right.
being honest about your entire, your whole situation for financial planning is like, it made me nervous.
Right. You feel vulnerable, right?
Yes, yes,
Yes. Yes. And I get that. And I'll just say, but the beautiful part of it is that you guys sat down and talked about it. And now you're on the same page. And then now you have a financial plan together and you know why you're doing what you're doing. You know why you're saving each month. You know where it's going towards, right? And that's the nice thing to have a roadmap and understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, how I'm investing my
absolutely.
money, why I have certain accounts. So
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. I think that's really important because I think the other thing too, and maybe it's another topic is if you plan financially, then it's one thing, and then the totality of your planning when it comes to wills, trusts, and other things come into play, right?
Right.
And so again, this is one big piece of the planning, but
Mhm.
it's an important one.
Right.
So, what are the greatest challenges that you see people when they come in? What do you see as probably kind of top one or two things that you see that prevent them from achieving their goals?
Their emotions. Yeah.
Tell me more.
It's their emotions. Because they get it's the fear that kicks in, right? And that's why it's nice to have a financial advisor because a financial advisor can say, hey, you know what? I understand how you're feeling, but let me give you data. Let me show you, right? Now I understand that, past performances doesn't guarantee future results. I get it, but it gives you an idea as far as kind of what to expect in a way, right? But it's their emotions. They get very scared, and when they get scared, they're paralyzed. They can't react. They don't do anything, right? And my thing is invest, stay invested, remember your goals, remember why you're doing what you're doing. And that's why the financial plan is important.
I like the fact that people need to remember the why.
Yes,
Why do I care about this? What am I trying to accomplish? And having that in the forefront when
right,
things are maybe not hard, are harder
right.
during economic times. Um, One of the things that I also wanted to ask you was, are there things that young people can do, whether it's high school, whether it's college? Like, what are like some small steps that they could take just to kind of get oriented with financial planning? What would you suggest?
For example, I can't wait till my son starts working because we're going to open up a Roth IRA for him, right? And with the Roth IRA, the money comes in after tax, but then it has all this time, especially if you're young, right? It has this time to grow tax free, right? And then when you take it out during retirement, it's completely tax free. So while it's invested, it's tax deferred. And then when you take it out for retirement, it's completely tax free. So I'd say start with that. Start with the Roth IRA when you're young, and let that grow. And can you imagine 10, 20, 30 years of it growing and all those earnings and then being able to take it out completely tax free? That's an incentive right
I
there.
love that. And by the way, the my 15-year-old stepdaughter started working at Chick-fil-A and she got her second paycheck. And
Right.
she's like, I'm gonna blow the first one. And then I'm like, okay. But she's starting to save. So, that makes me think about, even for her, even if she
Mhm.
starts at $100 or, every
Right.
paycheck or whatnot, I'm thinking 15 and think about it, 50 years, 60 years from now, what in
Right.
the world she could have.
Right.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. What would be like when you during the pandemic, and especially with the economy the way it is right now, where I bought a get 2 gallons of milk at 4.99. And so, what kind of advice would you give? Because you got pressures, your income may not be going up, but all the
Right.
prices are going up. So,
Right.
what are some of the things that you can, perspective that you can provide to,
Mm.
continue to save? But what do you do?
I'd say you need to learn how to adjust to the situation. I'll be more specific, okay? Growing up, I knew when our family had money, okay? So when we didn't have money, we had no meats, okay? Rice, eggs, instant noodle. That when we had a little bit more money, my mom added the chicken. And then we had a little bit more money, she added the pork. And then when we had a little bit more money, we had beef. So I knew in our family when we had money and when we didn't. So we adjusted, right? The other thing I would say is understand your debt. Like, for example, your water bill, right? You know, there are programs out there so that if you use water from this time of the day to this time of the day, this is how much it's going to cost you. Or if you use it like late at night, past X time, 8 p.m., I'm just making this up, right? It's going to probably be a little bit cheaper. Just understand, I would reach out to the utility company and say, hey, you know what? Would you explain this program and how I could reduce my water bill, for example? And they'll give you the tips. They'll share it because I'm my best friend right now. She'll say, okay, it's this time now I can start the dishwasher, and she's seen the difference in her water bill. Okay.
That's
So I would say, go ahead.
I said that's amazing. Just the
Mm,
time in the day that you use certain things, it makes a difference in your
mm,
bill.
yeah,
So that's a great strategy just
yeah,
to, yeah, I never thought about the fact that time of day,
yeah.
when should you crank up your AC or not, or, that's a good strategy.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is, for example, if you have credit cards debt, see if there's a program where you can consolidate it and have 0% APR for 6 months, 12 months. Take advantage of those different programs out there, right? That's how I got out of credit card debt. When I graduated from college, I had credit card debt. And what I did was I consolidated and I did the balance transfer and took advantage of the 0% APR. And I made sure I paid off all my credit cards within that time period. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, there are programs out there. Just reach out to, the utility companies, to the credit card companies, even like hospital bills, for example. You can call them and say, hey, here's my situation. And they will work out a payment program for you.
Absolutely. I also love credit unions.
Mhm.
When I was closing on my home, one of the things I noticed is that they were a little bit better with the fees, like closing costs and things like that, where they're a little bit more forgiving versus like a major bank. And so again, I think you just have to do some research
Exactly. Shop
about
around,
what's
do your research.
possible. Yeah, absolutely. And these days, it's not like you have to have the bank right there, right? I mean,
Mhm.
they can be in different places, and a lot of virtual banking takes place. So, I think
Right.
that's another thing. Um, if Let me ask the other question about from a tax perspective, because this is something my mom taught me. She's always thinking tax at her
Hmm.
age, right? Tax, tax,
Hmm.
tax, everything's tax.
Okay.
And so when you're talking about financial planning and from a tax perspective, what are some things that you're talking about with their clients as it relates to how does certain things help them with tax? Any
Okay.
thoughts around that?
Yeah, it really depends on the client's situation. For example, I have a client, she just recently sold her business and she has about a $4 million profit, right? So if you look at the capital gains taxes and she's in that 20%, right? So that's around what, $800,000 of taxes. Now, luckily, she doesn't have to pay them all immediately right now. And so we have some time for her. So what we're doing in her situations, we're harvesting losses. So we're doing tax loss harvesting for her so that it can offset some of those capital gains. So she would end up paying less taxes, right? So, and then when I do a financial plan for my clients, what I like to do is I'd like to see, okay, where do you fall in the federal tax bracket? Right. And then decide, okay, for your 401k, should we do more on the pre tax side or on the Roth 401k? right? And then I create the financial plan. I provide them the data and say, let's look at the numbers. Let's look at, because the actual plan will show you how much taxes you're paying starting from, today all the way till the plan ends when you pass, right? And so we look at that and we try to find opportunities. We'll also try to find opportunities for Roth conversions, right? Now, keep in mind the law might change where that could go away in the future, but as of today, you can still do Roth conversions. So there are just many ways, but it really depends on the client situation. And for our non-qualified accounts, for example, too, if you're in a high tax bracket, we have, they're like muni bonds, right? So you're not paying federal tax part of it. So it's just there are many opportunities to help save in taxes. Another thing I do too is, like, if you're self-employed and you don't have a retirement plan, I'll look at the client situation and try to determine, does a simple IRA make sense for you? Does a SEP IRA make sense for you? Does a individual 401k make sense for you? Let's understand your situation. And if you don't want to pay taxes, up front, whatever you contribute into those retirement accounts, the simple, the SEP, or the solo 401k, at the end of the day, when you contribute into in a pre-tax side, your taxable income is reduced. So there are just, it really depends on the client situation and understanding where they're at, how much they're making, what their needs are, and then providing solutions to pay less taxes. So
I like
yes.
that because the income's the income, right? So either do it with tax deductions or tax-free instruments or whatnot, depending on what is the best for the client.
Right.
One thing that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to go back to real quick is the risk tolerance part.
Mm-hmm.
And what are some things that you do to assess somebody's risk tolerance? And how does the time as they get closer to actual retirement,
Mm-hmm.
how does that potentially change?
Right. So, we have a risk tolerance questionnaire, and I will ask questions and provide different scenarios. For example, one of the questions is, if you had $100,000 and you invested in the market and there was a sudden change where it dropped 24% and now you have 76,000, what's your immediate reaction? Is it, hey, sell everything, let's reduce let's not invest anymore? Or is it, hey, you know what? It's an opportunity. I want to buy more, right? There's 4 different categories, right? And you would select it based upon your immediate reaction. So we have a risk tolerance questionnaire that I will go through with the clients, and I will watch them answer it. And I love watching them because sometimes a client may say, I'm aggressive. But then when they complete the risk tolerance questionnaire, they're really not aggressive, right? Or they'll say, I'm aggressive, but then the market's volatile and they'll call me and they'll say, you know what, go ahead and sell. And I'd have to kind of calm them down and remind them, hey, wait a minute, for this particular account, remember, you have 30 years till retirement. You have time for things to recover, right? So it's nice to have a financial advisor to say, hey, I get how you're feeling right now, but let's look at that plan again, right? But the risk tolerance questionnaire is very helpful. And then as I'm meeting with clients, I get to know and understand them better, because sometimes they may say one thing but react differently. And so I can adjust. And the nice thing is we can adjust, so if you're moderately aggressive, I can make you aggressive, or I can make you more moderate in your model, right? It's nothing set in stone, right?
Yeah.
And
I would be willing to, I think one thing I learned about myself is I was willing to be more aggressive when I was younger.
mhm.
And, when you talk about, what is your risk tolerance? But I think as I kind of head towards retirement, the conversation is more about, now do we start adjusting? Like, what do we need to adjust to make it more real? Because it's real, right?
Right.
It's the horizon is real. So
Right.
what else do we need to adjust? And then it becomes a little bit more conservative from my perspective. So that's what I've experienced for myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we do that for our clients. As you're getting closer to needing that money, to taking the distributions out, we generally, at the end of the day, make it more conservative, to try to ensure that, hey, you're not going to have to worry about the volatility of the market, right? Because at the end of the day, stocks are more volatile than bonds, right? But But so we make it a little bit more conservative as you get closer to your retirement, to your
Absolutely.
goals.
Absolutely. So the other thing that I was curious about is, there are, I think, it makes sense. You have short-term needs and then like maybe a midterm and a long-term. What are some examples of things that you would maybe advise a client for maybe a short, medium, or long-term, not necessarily specific funds, but maybe more of the strategy?
Well, so there's different allocations, right? So there could be a moderate allocation, which is around 60% stocks, 40% bonds, moderately aggressive, a little bit more equity. And then as you go aggressive, a little bit more equity, right? So depending on when that money is needed, we find a model that's appropriate for the goals, right? So if you told me, hey, Linda, I need that money within 5 years, then I'm not going to put you in an aggressive model, right? Because of that volatility, because I know that you're going to need to touch that money. So
Yeah.
I would go, more on the conservative side, right? Moderate conservative side. And so every account, like I mentioned, each account can be very different and very specific, based upon the needs for that particular account.
Yeah, I was thinking about what you said earlier about, if you have a younger couple who wants to buy a house within
Mhm.
the next 5 years, your
Yeah.
strategy is going to look different there
Yeah.
versus I'm looking at, 65,
Right.
to get the funds. So I think I love the fact that you can customize everything to their needs. And I think that's the benefit of having a financial advisor is that customization with somebody who knows what they're doing,
Right.
right? And how do you keep up with what's happening in the marketplace? What are the things that you do to kind of, because you got a lot going on with all the
Mhm.
different clients.
Right.
And so, how do you keep up?
The nice thing is I work part of a team, right? So we have a CFA on the team and everything, and his job is to stay on top of the market and make sure that, our models are competitive to, the benchmarks and other third-party money managers. And, and for me, I attend different meetings and conferences. I am constantly reading. I get weekly updates, daily updates. I just, and I'm a curious person. So I like to hear and see things and read things from different perspectives. Because at the end of the day, I'm not going to lie, I read things and I listen to things with a grain of salt, right? But then I like to travel too to go out there and see for myself with my own eyes, right?
Mhm.
So I'm just that type of person where whatever I read or watch, I don't completely believe it. I'd have to hear it from different people, right? From different analysts, from different companies. And then I make that decision. But the nice thing is I worked with the team. So I have a CFA on the team and we have weekly updates and we have discussions and we'll discuss different things. So that's what I do.
Well, first of all, it sounds like it's kind of that philosophy, trust but verify, right?
Right, right,
I love
right.
that. So, one of the things that I think is important as a financial planner, because again, like I said, you guys, I mean, to me, this is very personal. Like
Mhm.
your financial planner is going to know all kinds of things about you, how you spend, how you save, your lifestyle. I mean, they pretty much get into it all. So, I think this is one of those things where it's not just about, oh, let me just take your money and like put it into different places. You really have a relationship,
I
right?
do. I do. My clients tell me everything. I mean, if they're thinking about going through a divorce, for example, they'll come to me and they'll tell me, and I'll say, okay. Or if they're about to get married, they'll come to me and say, Linda, I'm about to get married. I'll say, okay, well, let's make sure your financial plan's current, up to date. Now I understand that when you marry someone, you have no intent of divorce. You marry, you're gonna think that this is gonna last forever, but we don't know what tomorrow brings. So let's just be safe about this and let's understand your financial situation and let's discuss this. Are you going to have a prenup? Are you not? If not, here's some things to do. Don't commingle, your assets, certain things like that. But my clients really do. They come to me for everything. Even when they're purchasing a new car, they'll call me. And it's good to know because the more I know, the more I can help. right? The more I can, and especially when when I'm staying on top of the news and everything, if I see something that could be helpful, I'm going to share it with them. Even I have one client, he said to me, Linda, I'm looking for another job, right? And I'm like, okay, well, as soon as you find that other job, send me the benefit package. We're going to go through it. I'm going to explain every single benefit you have, and I will explain my thought process, and then you can decide what makes most sense for you. I'll tell you, hey, if I were in your shoes, this is what I would do, and here's why. That, I want you part of that decision making. You make that final decision, but we'll go through it together and I'll explain every little part of your benefit for you,
I
right?
love that.
Yeah.
I love that. It's kind of like having, just somebody on your shoulder who
Mm.
like just gives you solid advice. So here, let me summarize a little bit about what I heard Linda talk about today. Number one is that she gets to know you first and make sure that she understands your priorities. She also does an assessment for your risk tolerance so that, understanding what those things are, if you're truly conservative or truly aggressive, she'll find that out through a questionnaire process. And then, at the end of the day, she's going to look at all of not only your financial situation, but the tax implications, and as well as your short-term, medium-term, long-term goals and what that looks like in order to make sure that she's meeting your needs. And then, scenario planning is what I also heard Linda talk about, different scenarios, different options based on what resonates with the client. And then at the end of the day, talk about the results, right? And she's data driven and she likes to show not just the why from her perspective, but she likes to show the data associated with that. And so that the client is comfortable. Is that pretty clear? Is that summarizing, Linda? Did I miss anything?
Sounds good. Yes.
And at the end of the day, it's never too early to start your financial planning. I heard you talk about, college, and I'm going to say high school, and the fact that it's never too early. And I just think that, again, it depends on your circumstances, but culturally, it also does make a difference on how you accumulate, whether it's the immediate core family or the whole family, including your extended family. That makes a difference too.
And it's also never too late to start, right? So, I mean, if you're in your 50s and you've never started, it's not too late. Just start.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you were to give the top 3 tips, the most important tips for our audience around where do we start? What do we do? What are the most important things I need to do if I want to get into the financial planning? What would you say?
I would say start with understanding your situation, understanding what you're doing, understanding your cash flow, understanding, how your money's being invested. If you don't understand it, it's okay. Go to a financial advisor and say, hey, I'm investing my money this way. Does this make sense? Is this appropriate for me? Because we can run reports and we can say, this is how your money's invested. But based upon your risk tolerance and time horizon, I probably do this, and let me show you what that means, right? But it's important to understand your situation. Don't be nervous about it. Don't sweep it underneath the rug. Just deal with it. I'd say start with understanding your situation. You could have a 401k plan, but sitting in money market, really, is that doing much for you? Right. So that's why you need to also take the next step, which is understanding how your money's invested. Does that make sense based upon your risk tolerance, your time horizon, and your goal? Right. Because I've met people that I have one client, she's really great at what she does. She's a doctor. She's really great at what she does. But then when it comes to the investment side, that's not where she's an expert at, right? And so luckily she has me, and I'll say, it's been sitting in money market for quite a few years. Let's nothing wrong with that, right? At least you open the account, but let's invest it based upon your financial goal, your time horizon, your risk tolerance. So I'd say, and then the other thing is it's never too late to start, right? Just do it. Why wait, right?
Absolutely.
It's about how long your money's invested in the market, right? And it's hard to time the market, so that's why it's good to have a system in place where it's automated, where you can dollar cost average, where, where you don't have to think about it. Keep it very simple, automate the process. And that's where, a financial advisor can help you. So.
Absolutely. I am just absolutely delighted that you spent time with us, Linda. Thank you so much for all the great tips and hints, and also sharing of yourself and your time. I truly, truly appreciate it. And it was such a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Sue Ann. Thank you for your time, and thank you for interviewing me. This is very new for me, but I really want everyone to succeed, really. And I really want everyone to achieve their own financial freedom, because the way I see it is that once you achieve your financial freedom, it's so much easier to help other people, right? And then it just branches out, and the kindness and the generosity spreads. And so don't wait, just go out there and start the process.
I love that. All right, you heard it, everybody. You better start thinking about your financial future and maybe take one action towards that future goal that you want to achieve. So with that, Dana and Moana, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you so much.
So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will.
If this the land of the free, it was a freedom then, when they annexed Hawaii and called it cedar lands, without any type of payment and no signing off. Called themselves a republic in 1894. 1.2 million acres overtaken from the native Hawaiians. When they resisted, the West retaliated in violence and erasure. The Hawaiian language is banned as part of colonialism's plan to expand, yeah.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe. As a part of their ongoing war with Asia, used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. No regard for all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. We will.
So if we put Hawaii into perspective, well, Black and Asian history is interconnected. Considering the fight with the Pacific, then of course, versus Asia, they was treated as a middleman for war, but didn't let the Western colorism run its course, cause dark skin was a sign of dignity to core. The land was taken in the name of capitalism, when prior to it was an actual kingdom. Clap back at the system.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe. As a part of their ongoing war with Asia, used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. No regard for all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. We will.